You know this moment in time. You remember what was at stake. You've seen this before. You remember what the crowd was like. And as we flash through the decades of wrestling history, it's always a welcome pastime to reminisce about the greatest moments of WWE's most prominent annual spectacle. There's a reason why they call it the Showcase of the Immortals, a grand stage where memorable narratives are told and their legacy perpetuates in the record books of sports entertainment. And as we celebrate the previous chronicles of the Squared Circle for this yearly event, it's safe to say that every wrestling fan has their fair share of favorite memories. So what we'll do is take a look back at some of those special Wrestlemania stories right here and now. Let's begin.
WrestleMania! Irresistible force meeting the immovable object.
Obviously, we can't feature every great match or moment that happened at WrestleMania, what with so many years of past history. But we'll try to capture some of those key moments in this particular stroll down memory lane. If we forget a few, it's fine. It makes for a great discussion in the comments section. There's a lot of lists out there already about the greatest WrestleMania moments ever, and even after going through each one, wrestling fans will always have more to add. Such is the nature of that many hours of pay-per-view or supercard specials. Naturally, the story begins back on March 31st of 1985. It was a time when it was hard to imagine a single wrestling promotion as being a nationwide entity, let alone the international powerhouse that it would become. Drawing the ire of regional promotions who were used to running events in their own areas, the McMahon family bet the farm, both literally and figuratively, on the success of the first WrestleMania. It was noted back on the 2011 documentary titled The True Story of WrestleMania that there's no way the WWE could have gone on afterwards had the inaugural WrestleMania failed. With stars both within the world of wrestling and those from the world of entertainment filling Madison Square Garden, those watching on closed-circuit television would get the first glimpse of what the following decades could look like in the world of sports entertainment. Yes, there were a few hiccups, like some of those not being a huge fan of Mr. T's spot in the main event, but the show did what it was supposed to in terms of broadening the fan base for professional wrestling. It was enough that the following year's WrestleMania 2 would be a night that featured an ambitious attempt to broadcast the event in 3 separate locations, namely a single hour in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles respectively over the course of 3 hours. Specifically, each location would get a live hour at their local venue with large screens being lowered to view the rest of the show remotely. Elaborate as the idea was, not many would consider this second event one of the stronger manias, even though the Wrestling Football Battle Royal featuring the Super Bowl winning Chicago Bears was an interesting plan, along with closing out the show with a world title steel cage match. Of course, many would say that the subsequent year's WrestleMania 3 represents the pinnacle moment in all of WWE lore. Hulk Hogan was at the top of his game, looking to do even more to cement himself as wrestling's premier frontman. Running up against a man who was being advertised as being undefeated for the previous 15 years in Andre the Giant, the stage was set for what would become the most iconic stare-down in wrestling history, which of course also was the setting for the slam heard round the world to close out the event. It was interesting to see the wrestlers firmly take center stage here, with the other pop culture celebrities being more of a nice-to-have rather than being the center of attention as they had been before. That, and not only would the reported 93,000 plus fans bear witness to Hogan vs. Andre's epic encounter, but they also got to be there for the show-stealing performance between Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Macho Man Randy Savage. Contested for the Intercontinental title, this back-and-forth edge-of-your-seat encounter was the best and most exciting wrestling match that many fans had seen at the time, and has aged quite well even when you watch it back today. The next 2 WrestleManias would occur at the same location, held at the Trump Plaza area in Atlantic City. A tournament for the vacated world title would see the Macho Man Randy Savage hoisting the belt high with Elizabeth on his shoulder over a defeated $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, and also Hulk was in Macho's corner. The story would come full circle with the explosion of the friendship between Macho Man and Hogan, and Hulk Hogan would regain the title the following year. That fifth WrestleMania would have some notable names on the undercard, and one of those names was ready for the bigger stage in the run-up to the next year's event. The sixth installment would take WrestleMania international, north of the border to Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And rather than take the traditional route of babyface versus mega heel for the main event, we'd see two fan favorites, and in fact, the two singles champions squaring off in a winner-take-all battle. This would be a night in which Hulkamania wouldn't prevail, as the WWF at the time would take a chance on an equally impressive physical specimen in the Ultimate Warrior to carry the flag for the company. As classic as this showdown and aftermath was, Warrior would spend less than a year at the top of the Federation ladder. This night would also see the final WrestleMania match for Andre the Giant as a competitor, and there'd be some key faces in the audience who just might make some WrestleMania appearances later on in life. Spoiler alert, by the way. An emotionally charged WrestleMania 7 would pit Hulk Hogan against the recently turned Sergeant Slaughter. The event was to be held in a larger venue, but was moved to the smaller Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena. It has been disputed whether or not this was due to a lack of ticket sales that caused the change, or if it was security concerns due to Sarge's recent switch to becoming an Iraqi sympathizer. Once again, the Macho Man would have a show-stealing performance this night in his career versus career match with the Ultimate Warrior. While Savage would come out on the losing end, the emotional reunion with Miss Elizabeth caused more than a few tears from the audience and at-home viewers. This was also the night that The Undertaker's undefeated WrestleMania streak would officially begin. Hogan would prevail and take back the world title to cap off the night's events. And controversial as it was for Sergeant Slaughter to be in this portrayal, he'd go on to become a great ambassador both in the world of pro wrestling and in G.I. Joe for the decades to follow. A tag team title switch would also happen this night, and one of the competitors on the losing end would begin his own singles run so that he could headline a few WrestleManias in the coming years. The 8th WrestleMania installment would see a double main event with Ric Flair and Macho Man Randy Savage contesting for the world title. Hogan would take on Sid Justice in the evening's final match, which has become somewhat infamous for Papa Shango missing his cue to head to the ring to break up the match, all of which resulted in a slightly late arrival and a messy finish. This was then followed by the return of the Ultimate Warrior to end the evening's events. A strong undercard match would see Bret the Hitman Hart win the Intercontinental title over Rowdy Roddy Piper, a bout that has become an all-time classic. The 9th WrestleMania was billed as the world's largest toga party, and Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas was done up to look like a Roman Colosseum. This Mania is infamous for being the one where Bret Hart would lose to a monster heel in Yokozuna via outside interference, only for the latter's manager, Mr. Fuji, to challenge Hulk Hogan out of the blue on Yokozuna's behalf, and thus Yokozuna would drop the title to the Hulkster mere moments after winning it. On the fringe between the golden era of wrestling and what was being known as the new generation of wrestling, a few things would change after this event, which signified Hulk's 5th title win and the last WrestleMania for the next 9 years. Naturally, Hulk was both Hollywood-bound and WCW-bound in his time between WWE stints. Take note too that this WrestleMania did continue The Undertaker's then unacknowledged unbeaten streak, albeit it was via a less conventional type of win as he took a disqualification victory over Giant Gonzalez. The first decade of WrestleMania would wrap up at Madison Square Garden as WrestleMania 10 was held in March of 1994. Yes, MSG was also the site of the first WrestleMania. A better WrestleMania than the previous years, the new generation was now in full swing as fresh faces took over from the old guard. There's a few must-see matches on this show, not the least of which is the show-stealing ladder match between Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon for the Intercontinental title. Highlights of this match continue to get played over and over throughout time, and rightfully so. Bret Hart would wrestle twice on this night, first in what's known as an epic opening pay-per-view match against younger brother Owen, which was a back-and-forth tilt that's as exciting to watch now as it was back then. Bret would win the title over Yokozuna later in the evening, who himself had retained the belt over Lex Luger just earlier on in the broadcast. For the Hitman, this WrestleMania certainly ended better for him than the last one. The second decade of WrestleMania kicked off with the 11th installment the following year. This was the one in which Shawn Michaels had previously won the Royal Rumble to earn a spot to face Diesel in the WWE Championship match, and was additionally notable for having both Jenny McCarthy and Pamela Anderson accompanying each competitor during the world title match entrances. Often considered one of the weaker Manias, this one ended the evening in a less than conventional main event between Bam Bam Bigelow and retired NFL linebacker Lawrence Taylor. That being said, the match itself was better than one would expect, and credit can be given to both Taylor for putting in the work to look more than credible as a wrestler, and to Bam Bam for doing his part as a professional to make the match look good given the circumstances. By the 12th Mania in 1996, the WWE was facing mounting competition in the Monday Night War with WCW. It would fall to Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels to largely carry the show with their 60-minute Iron Man match. This was a back and forth tilt that not only went the distance, but also into overtime, and had many, including both competitors, incredibly proud of putting on such a show. This is a well-told story that's worth a watch and a rewatch, especially with the exciting second half and the finish of the bout. This WrestleMania would also feature a brief return for the Ultimate Warrior, and was the first WrestleMania that Stone Cold Steve Austin participated in. Lucky number 13 for WrestleMania would see Bret Hart steal the show yet again. WWE at this time was on the losing end of the Monday Night War, but they had an ace in Stone Cold Steve Austin who was growing rapidly in popularity. And while this wasn't quite the peak of his singles run, it does feature what some would say is the best match ever, both in the career of Stone Cold and Bret. This no DQ submission match is the one that is often played in highlights, with Stone Cold's effort not being quite enough to overcome the Hitman's sharpshooter finisher. Sadly, this would be Bret's last WrestleMania as a full-time, fully active competitor for reasons that go beyond the scope of this video. Notice well that The Undertaker would win the world title from Psycho Sid on this evening, and it would be The Rock's first WrestleMania, then going under the name of Rocky Maivia. 1998's WrestleMania 14 would occur firmly in what's known as WWE's historically famous Attitude Era. Of course, we all know it for being the one that Mike Tyson was involved in, and his involvement was crucial for the finish of the world title match. Stone Cold Steve Austin would take his well-earned place as the world champion here this night, being the biggest star that the company had to offer. We'd see the temporary retirement of Shawn Michaels, though he'd find his way back into active competition again after 4 years. And WWE had established Kane as a reliable main event competitor, though he'd be defeated by his storyline brother, The Undertaker, on this night. To close out the millennium, 1999's WrestleMania 15 would feature the first of 3 WrestleMania encounters between The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin would win this first encounter, and we'd have a Hell in a Cell match as well between Taker and the Big Boss Man to continue The Undertaker's WrestleMania winning streak. This was also the night of a strange, one-sided shoot-fighting bout between Butterbean and Bart Gunn, as Bart was apparently being punished for winning the WWE's Brawl for All shoot-fighting tournament previously. And we should also give a special shout-out to Owen Hart, as it would be the last time we would see him in a WrestleMania event after the tragic circumstances surrounding his death a couple of months after this. The wrestling world still loves Owen to this day, and always will. WrestleMania 2000 would kick off the new millennium the following year with an event that received mixed reactions. The main event with Triple H, The Rock, The Big Show, and Mick Foley is often described as being a bit underwhelming. However, many would agree that the Triangle Ladder match with the tag teams of Edge and Christian, the Hardy Boys, and the Dudleys is must-watch TV. Also, the triple threat match that consisted of 2 falls with the European and Intercontinental titles on the line is worth a watch as well, given that Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, and Chris Jericho all put in great performances. Now, 2001's WrestleMania 17, or WrestleMania X7 if you prefer, has at times been called the best Mania by lots of people. Coinciding with the end of the Attitude Era, WWE had recently purchased rival company WCW, putting a definitive end to the Monday Night War. An extremely strong show top to bottom and loaded with tons of talent, it featured the second WrestleMania encounter between The Rock and Austin. Austin would turn heel by night's end, aligning himself with former heated rival Mr. McMahon. Also, the tables, ladders, and chairs match is probably the highlight of the show. Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys, and the Hardys put in yet another breathtaking performance, with such high spots like this one being replayed over and over again as the years went on. If there's one Wrestlemania worth watching start to finish, this is the one. The 18th Wrestlemania was one where we'd see some old faces return, and also some new faces that had adopted the WWE as their new home after WCW had folded, now that we were a year removed from the conclusion of the Monday Night War. And while Chris Jericho and Triple H would officially close the show with the main title match, all eyes were on the Icon vs. Icon showdown in a coming together of two key players spanning across multiple generations of wrestling. To be honest, the actual wrestling itself between Hollywood Hulk Hogan and The Rock isn't exactly a technical masterpiece, but the way they played off of the crowd's reaction itself, and the story that they told in the ring are what people remember, and rightfully so. You knew even back then that what you were watching was literally history in the making. The Rock would emerge victorious, but it was the Hulkster that the crowd rallied behind, and in many ways it was something of a homecoming for Hulk Hogan. This would also be the first time that The Undertaker would acknowledge his undefeated WrestleMania winning streak, holding up 10 fingers in an ominous celebratory manner after he defeated Ric Flair. WrestleMania 19 at Seattle's Safeco Field has a card that's loaded enough to rival that of the highly acclaimed WrestleMania 17 just 2 years prior. And yes, Brock Lesnar's missed shooting star press and dangerous landing in the WWE Championship match was scary, but thankfully he finished the match, and it shouldn't do too much to detract from what a great battle he had with Kurt Angle. The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin would face off in their third and final WrestleMania match, with The Rock emerging victorious to give a fitting send-off to close out the Rattlesnake's storied in-ring wrestling career. That and Shawn Michaels would have a fantastic back-and-forth match with Chris Jericho, and we'd also see Mr. McMahon take on Hulk Hogan in a street fight. This pay-per-view is another candidate for being the best WrestleMania ever. WrestleMania 20 would give us yet another milestone anniversary for this storied event, and naturally, we would return back to Madison Square Garden in March of 2004, which of course was the birthplace of Mania to begin with. I'll immediately point out that Chris Benoit's world title win over Shawn Michaels and Triple H to close out the show was most certainly a feel-good moment at the time, but of course, it's been hard to go back and watch that without immediately thinking about what happened with Benoit in the final days of his life just a few years later. On Vice's Dark Side of the Ring Season 2 feature that focused on Benoit, Chris's son David had said that he had wished his father had just retired that night instead and ended his career on a high note. Eddie Guerrero retained his title on that night as well in a good match with Kurt Angle and came out to celebrate Benoit's victory to close out the show. Eddie's nephew, Chavo, was also quoted in saying in the aforementioned Dark Side of the Ring episode that this moment was a happy storybook ending for that year's WrestleMania. This would also be the first WrestleMania for John Cena, who would win over the Big Show in the US title match. And notoriously, Bill Goldberg and Brock Lesnar would wrestle to a poorly received match, as both were on their way out of the WWE after this. Based out of Los Angeles, WrestleMania 21 would take on a Hollywood movie theme. And while you'd see big championship title wins for both John Cena as well as Batista on this night, Mania 21 is largely known as being the event where the first Money in the Bank ladder match took place. Edge would win this inaugural match, and of course we'd see his historic cash-in at the start of the 2006 calendar year. Other highlights included the excellent showdown between Shawn Michaels and Kurt Angle, as well as the continuation of The Undertaker's unbeaten streak over Randy Orton. 2006's WrestleMania 22 in Chicago would also be a worthwhile event, continuing the trend of solid WrestleMania outings. Of note, John Cena was booed quite loudly in the main event against Triple H, despite the fact that Cena was being booked and pushed as a fan favorite. But the big highlights this night would of course include the epic hardcore match, which ended with the fiery table finish between Edge and Mick Foley. That and Shawn Michaels told a great story in his match with Mr. McMahon, emerging victorious despite all manners of outside interference. And 2 full decades after the historic Pontiac Silverdome event of WrestleMania 3, WrestleMania 23 would now return to Michigan once again at Ford Field to see a very comparable attendance in terms of crowd number. Aretha Franklin would sing America the Beautiful just as she did 20 years prior, and Shawn Michaels would do what he does best by having an incredible main event, this time with John Cena to close out the night. Casual fans and even non-wrestling fans may remember this event for being the one in which Donald Trump appeared and helped shave Mr. McMahon's head after the Bobby Lashley vs. Umaga match, and it was great to see Stone Cold Steve Austin participate in the spectacle of it all as a guest referee. The follow-up WrestleMania 24 in Florida during 2008 is probably best remembered for 2 things. 1, the emotional farewell match for Ric Flair, who retired in a loss to Shawn Michaels, as the two would tell a very, very well told story. And as well, the night is known for the David vs. Goliath encounter between the Big Show and boxing household name Floyd Mayweather. Of note as well is The Undertaker would beat Edge in the world title match to continue his mounting legendary unbeaten WrestleMania streak. The 25th event, which was WrestleMania's silver anniversary, took place in Texas during the spring of 2009. The best match of this night, and one could dare say, was an incredible back and forth encounter that could easily rival the Savage vs. Steamboat match of 1987, was indeed the match between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. This one is known for the fancy, elaborate entrances at the beginning, as well as for the highly entertaining 30-minute battle that they had in the ring. This match had tons of high spots, boatloads of emotion, and left you legitimately wondering if Shawn Michaels could end The Undertaker's unbeaten streak at this point. The Undertaker would triumph yet again, even though Shawn was well known as being Mr. WrestleMania by this point for his consistent show-stealing performances. This, by many, was indeed considered as match of the year, even without a title on the line. The rest of the event is still talked about in general, but this is the match that you go back and watch the show for. A rematch between the Dead Man and the Heartbreak Kid would occur at the following year's WrestleMania 26. And as entertaining as this rematch was, the real talking point was what was at stake, being a streak versus career stipulation. Yes, Shawn Michaels would lose this night again to The Undertaker and would indeed retire post-match in a very heartwarming farewell. Another talking point for this night is the match between Bret Hart and Mr. McMahon. Quality-wise, we knew that there wasn't much to expect, as we had accepted by this time that post-2002 recovery Bret wasn't going to be able to take the bumps like he had before and could never be expected to. It does what it's supposed to though, to give Bret the retribution that's been long awaited since Vince's orchestration of the 1997 Montreal Screwjob. WrestleMania 27 in Georgia was a night of both highs and lows. The Michael Cole vs. Jerry Lawler match fiasco is often credited as being one of the worst, if not the worst, match in WrestleMania history, even though we did get to see Stone Cold Steve Austin act as guest referee. There would be some good matches though, like CM Punk vs. Randy Orton, but once again, The Undertaker would have the performance of the evening, putting his streak on the line again, this time against Triple H. With no-holds-barred rules, we had moments, especially near the end, where Taker looked like he might actually lose the match. But in yet another masterfully told story that gripped the crowd with its epic finish, The Undertaker would dig deep for a surprise submission victory. Post-match, they played up the fact that Triple H was able to get up on his own power despite such a brutal encounter. Meanwhile, The Undertaker needed to be helped and rolled on a cart back up the entranceway, making him look beatable and mortal. And the highlights and replays of this would feed into the build-up of the following year's rematch. And yes, we'd see that rematch at WrestleMania 28 as planned. The stakes felt higher, both with this being a Hell in a Cell match, but also because Shawn Michaels showed up to be the special guest referee. Another great back and forth encounter that's worth a watch, The Undertaker would win yet again, taking his streak to a perfectly aligned 20-0. Billed as being the end of an era, perhaps the most iconic shot of this was The Undertaker, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels walking back up the ramp arm in arm post-match. Then, looking back to soak up the crowd's reaction and embracing as the three could celebrate what they had all accomplished career-wise, as well as their efforts in putting together a string of incredible, memorable performances between WrestleManias 25 and 28. We'd also have a good match this night between Chris Jericho and CM Punk, and it was great to see two generational level talents in The Rock and John Cena to close out the show. This was a high drama encounter with a fun finish that was the first of two back-to-back WrestleMania showdowns between this pair of icons. The Rock would be victorious on this night. The Rock and Cena's second WrestleMania showdown would occur at the following year's 29th annual event. This time, it was contested for the WWE Championship, and it would be Cena who would prevail in the evening's final match. Triple H would put his career on the line against Brock Lesnar, although the cerebral assassin would emerge victorious, and The Undertaker would defeat CM Punk in a highly praised match. Take note that this would be The Undertaker's last consecutive win of his legendary undefeated streak. We'd hit another major milestone with the 30th WrestleMania in 2014, and what better way to kick off the show than to have Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and The Rock greet the audience with the opening segment. At one point, Hogan would hilariously refer to the venue, which was the Superdome in New Orleans, as the Silver Dome, probably by force of habit due to it being the place where he slammed Andre the Giant years and years prior. There'd be a few talking points here to make this Mania one for the ages. First off was the shocking loss that The Undertaker took at the hands of Brock Lesnar, thus ending his WrestleMania win streak that had lasted for over 2 decades. Do yourself a favor and check out how this match ends, especially the reaction of Paul Heyman, who was in Brock's corner, and the stunned nature of the crowd after the ref counts to 3. Whether or not Brock was the right person to end the streak is up for debate, but the fact remains that this is one of the landmark moments in WrestleMania history. But overall, this evening was about the hard-working journey of Daniel Bryan. The crowd's chosen favorite, with his all-inspiring yes movement, Bryan would earn himself a title shot in the main event by first defeating Triple H early on in the night. And then he'd go on to beat Randy Orton and Batista in a triple threat match to close out the show. It's a match ending and celebration that's worth watching over and over, knowing that the fans got their way, and to see Bryan get a picture-perfect, storybook, happy ending as an underdog who overcame the odds on the grandest stage possible. Now, from this point onward, this particular discussion will be truncated a bit for the following WrestleManias. The reason for that is, this video package is about classic, old-school memories for the most part, and arbitrarily, one can argue that by 2014, we'd see a few key changes. The first was the rise of the WWE Network, which put the majority of our classic memories into a vast, expansive, on-demand streaming service in conjunction with newer content. Now, this new network at the time served as an update to older streaming services that WWE had tried previously. 2014 would also be a turning point, what with the aforementioned ending of The Undertaker's win streak. We'd also see some key established stars depart the company at this time, and in the period shortly after, we'd see some other company mainstays make their way to part-time wrestling status. Now, as we hit the home stretch, WrestleMania 31 had its share of valuable memories. One was the WWE match debut of the icon Sting, who faced off against Triple H. But the biggest discussion topic was Seth Rollins' cash-in of his Money in the Bank briefcase during the main event. Thus, Rollins would insert himself into the championship scene mid-match and would take the title home from Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, an act that has been since dubbed as the heist of the century. The 32nd event was at the time the longest of the single-day WrestleMania shows, being in the range of 5 hours long for its main card. It's not one of the better Manias based on fan reception and critic reactions, though The Rock would have a quick squash match against Eric Rowan, and the WWE would continue to experiment with Roman Reigns as champion, albeit Reigns wouldn't be accepted by many fans in this capacity until a few years later. Mania 33 was another show of ups and downs. Yes, it was worth the adrenaline spike to see Goldberg return to a WrestleMania after a dozen years away from the granddaddy of them all, albeit he'd lose to Brock Lesnar this night. John Cena would propose to then-girlfriend Nikki Bella in an emotional sequence, and The Undertaker would tease his retirement post-match with Roman Reigns, though as we'd see, he'd be back for a more fitting send-off a few years later. The 34th WrestleMania had some good elements to it. Here's where we'd see the debut of Ronda Rousey during a tag match. The women would further showcase their talent with a great battle between Asuka and Charlotte Flair, and we'd have a good Intercontinental title match, as well as fans being more than happy to see Daniel Bryan return to in-ring competition in victorious fashion after his previous retirement. WrestleMania 35 was another lengthy 5+ hour event with a pre-show even extending the runtime beyond this. The huge story this night was the women's triple threat winner-take-all match to end the show, and it was quite the occasion to see the women close out the event as Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and Ronda Rousey deservedly took center stage, with Lynch emerging victorious. We'd also see an emotional battle between Kofi Kingston and Daniel Bryan, with Kingston getting his hard-earned title win. And we'd bear witness to the retirement match of Kurt Angle. As we get beyond this, we enter the pandemic era with a WrestleMania 36 that had to occur over 2 nights with no crowd in attendance. Yes, it was good to see Drew McIntyre culminate his hard-working journey with a major title win, and this 2-night event would also have an interesting set of cinematic matches. First, with an amazingly filmed Boneyard match between The Undertaker and AJ Styles on night 1, and then a Firefly Funhouse match between The Fiend Bray Wyatt and a returning John Cena on night 2. WrestleMania 37 would see the return of a live audience and would continue the tradition of multi-night WrestleManias. Bianca Belair would have a hard-fought win and an emotional celebration after defeating Sasha Banks. And also, people will remember Roman Reigns' double pinfall highlight against Edge and Daniel Bryan to close out night 2. By this point, Roman had established himself in his more fitting tribal chief persona that his career will be remembered for. By 2022, we'd get deeper into the era of 2-night WrestleManias. There's probably a lot that could be discussed, but as mentioned before, we're pacing the discussion for just selected highlights. WrestleMania 38 this year is probably best remembered for the return of Cody Rhodes in a well-received performance against Seth Rollins, and also for Stone Cold Steve Austin's feel-good, no-holds-barred return against Kevin Owens. As we round the corner to end the 4th decade of WrestleMania, there's probably a lot of high spots, celebrity appearances, and amazing feats of athleticism that can be discussed. But the biggest talking point for WrestleManias 39 and 40 will be Cody Rhodes and his bid to finish his story in his battles against Roman Reigns, as well as his plans to take the title. And however you feel about Roman, as well as the bloodline and The Rock's involvement, well, that can be discussed for years and years to come. In the end, the decades of WrestleMania's history are filled with time-tested memories. Some good, some not so good. Some controversial, with others being unanimously accepted feel-good moments. What was once a trial to see if such an event could be pulled off has now evolved into an entire season's worth of anticipation and excitement. From the road to WrestleMania, beginning with the iconic image of each Royal Rumble's winner pointing to the WrestleMania sign every January, to the assembly of storylines feeding into each annual extravaganza, to the aftermath that goes well past WrestleMania and into the WrestleMania Backlash event that occurs a month after the show, there's just something special when you say the word WrestleMania to fans across the globe. Now, do us all a favor and share your own favorite WrestleMania memories in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I'm gonna put another old school wrestling retrospective, which you can click on right over here, or for a look at the toy line that was based on some of the wrestlers covered in this video, you can click right over here. And with that, I'll see you all next time. Thanks again, and take care.